Well, our next speaker, so it's Valentina Zaffino from the Pontifical Lateran University. She will be presenting her remark on religious enthusiasm, fanaticism, tolerance, and atheism in Cambridge Platonist debate. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Natalia. Thank you to everybody for attending our conference and our panels. So here we are, and the broad aim of my paper is to analyze Harry Moore's thought on religious enthusiasm in the light of the Cambridge Platonist survey. Notably, I would like to answer the following questions. According to Moore, what is the difference between religious enthusiasm and philosophical enthusiasm? And which is the positive role they should play in the modern social context? This last aspect of the matter, the positive features of enthusiasm, is a theme partly overlooked by research so far, while scholars have investigated Harry Moore's critique of the negative effects of enthusiasm more deeply. As we know, in the 17th century, many sects flourished in England, often based on the assumption that the believers were animated by the divine presence. In their own opinion, God would give his message to inspired people who had the mission to speak on behalf of God himself. This social and religious scenario prompted many philosophers to reflect on the theme of enthusiasm, considered in an etymological meaning from the Greek en and theos, to have God within. Focusing on Moore's Enthusiasmus Triumphatus, written in English in 1656 and published again in Latin in 1679, I will first reconstruct Moore's criticism of enthusiasm, and then I will highlight the notion of positive enthusiasm that he pinpointed. But I would like to share my screen. Okay, I think you can see what I see. Well, in the former negative sense, enthusiasm is identified with fanaticism and the social upheaval caused by religion. Harry Moore proposes a rational religion, namely rational Christianity, and maintains that the deviated imagination, being opposed to reason, is also opposed to the true religion. In fact, in such a perspective, religious faith must not be without rational investigation. Therefore, while enthusiastic imagination pushes someone to accept false and deceiving phenomena, reason evaluates the truthfulness of logical propositions. Thus, Moore openly criticizes enthusiasm and identifies it with fanatical fideism, based on the assumption that faith does not need any rational understanding whatsoever. On the contrary, Moore affirms that religion cannot be irrational, neither can it not be rational, because reason is present in God himself. Obviously, God's reason is not like the human one, which is in continuous development, since man can understand the objects of his knowledge only according to a gradual succession. Instead, God's reason is a stable reason, which knows everything at once, because all the causes of all things are present simultaneously in the mind of God. The stated purpose of Harry Moore's Enthusiasmus Triumphatus is to identify the nature, causes, kinds, and cure of enthusiasm. With regards to the causes, the author embraces a traditional theory and affirms that the main cause of enthusiasm is melancholy. See section 18. In this perspective, ancient medicine, according to the theory of humors of Galen, recognizes in melancholy a physical pathology, due to a lack of harmony in the four humors. The melancholic temperament has its roots in excess of black bile in the body, due to the astrological influence of the planet Saturn. So melancholy generates absurd ideas in the deviated human mind, and reason cannot remove or destroy, despite the proof of their falsity. Now, contextualizing Harry Moore in the frame of Cambridge Platonism, I will give just a quick nod to Damaris Marsham, the daughter of Ralph Cadworth and friend of John Locke. In fact, she considers herself to be afflicted by melancholy. A letter addressed from Damaris to Locke, letter number 896, suggests that the woman became close to Labadist mysticism and asked Locke to visit their community on her behalf. We know that on August 22nd, 1684, Locke spent the whole day there, subsequently writing a very critical report. They both defined the sect as a group of enthusiasts, moved by fanaticism instead of reason and true faith. So both Locke and the Cambridge Platonists were very harsh in judging religious enthusiasm, stating that no space must be given to the supposed inspiration of believers. According to Harry Moore, this kind of enthusiasm is a serious illness that can be cured with the so-called diatrion, which is a composition of three excellent medicines: temperance, humility, and reason. Therefore, Moore proposes a religious solution to the religious problem of enthusiasm, and also a religious solution to the social matter of enthusiasm. The theme of enthusiasm is also strictly connected to the topic of religious tolerance. In fact, for Harry Moore, those who unjustly present themselves as being inspired by God place themselves outside the civil and religious community, since they instigate other men to follow the fruits of their delirious imagination. Hence, while enthusiasm is nothing but a genius of rational knowledge, tolerance is founded upon true knowledge. We can thus see how, in this sense, tolerance has a religious, political, anthropological, and gnoseological foundation. In addition to religious enthusiasm, Harry Moore describes philosophical enthusiasm, section 42 and so forth, which mostly afflicts people devoted to speculation. While melancholy drives men towards religion and devotion to God, it can sometimes also lead to the conviction that God prefers them to all other people and inspires in them holy and enlightened thoughts. Concerning this theme, Moore mentions an Italian lady, Eleonora Meliorina from Mantua, who was convinced that she had married a king and used to behave like a queen, spending her whole life as if she lived at court. According to Harry Moore, this woman is no different from those melancholics who write books about the visions in which they believe that the Holy Spirit has inspired them, but that have been produced by melancholy. They built their philosophical systems based on false assumptions and, like Eleonora Meliorina, live a lie. Harry Moore maintains that some philosophers, chiefly natural philosophers, are subject to philosophical enthusiasm. He provides many examples of this, listing a series of physical and metaphysical notions that, in his opinion, are wrong because not rational. And just because they are not rational, they cannot in any way be the fruit of true philosophy, but are the fruit of philosophical fanaticism. The problem is always the disaccord with reason a problem that for the Cambridge Platonists is precisely of atheists too, who cannot rationally justify their being atheists. Harry Moore also mentioned another kind of enthusiasm, the political one. See section 32. It can be considered a consequence of religious and philosophical enthusiasm because the ideas prompted by imagination, involving both theological and philosophical matters, have also social and political implications. Some men consider themselves as great men sent by God and the liberators of the people. There are many examples reported by historians that testify that some men believed themselves to be kings, emperors, or popes, although they were only poor and ignorant people. In section 31, and in section 63 and so forth, Harry Moore deals with the notion of positive enthusiasm. This is my point. He admits that true enthusiasm exists and it is the antidote against another important religious and social danger, that is atheism. As we know, Moore dedicated his An Antidote Against Atheism, published in 1652, to this theme. Moreover, as the author attests in the incipit of Enthusiasmus Triumphatus, although enthusiasmus and atheismus seem like two things that are opposed to each other, they are nonetheless similar in some respect. And the reason is that they both are excesses of the faculties of soul. In my opinion, Harry Moore's focus on positive enthusiasm provides a crucial and original contribution to the English debate. He describes the true enthusiast as a pious and holy soul who has miraculously been filled with love for God and with his joy and peace. This sort of person is balanced and modest and claims to be able to experience firsthand what has been revealed in the Holy Scriptures. From a social point of view, Moore considers that the true enthusiast does not set himself up as a role model to follow, nor as a kind of prophet, but he praises God and helps his neighbors. Nevertheless, those who really have God in their hearts can really present him to others. Harry Moore affirms that without risking that he himself be accused of fanaticism, his belief is that the right of prophecy can often be found even in the soul of a man who was involved in things of great public benefit. This kind of man can become a social and political leader because he is closer to God than other people through his excellent use of reason. We can see how the theme of political enthusiasm recurs, even in a positive sense. In fact, it is not at all improbable that divine providence manifests itself in a special way to those who pursue social and political harmony. Certainly, these people need to have strictly observed the religious and rational guidelines in order to spread the Christian message. According to Harry Moore, this is true positive enthusiasm. I do not have enough time to continue talking about positive religious enthusiasm because I want to underline Moore's investigation on positive philosophical enthusiasm. He affirms that what is said above for Christians also applies in some way to eminent philosophers. In this regard, he mentions Plato and Plotinus, considering them to be attracted by beauty and striving to elevate their souls even more. As examples of positive philosophical enthusiasm, I am not at all surprised that more cites Plato and Plotinus. However, I do not think that the motive of this choice is only more personal, strong adherence to the Neoplatonic tradition, but also because of a sort of history of enthusiasm, if I may say, which was born with Plato. In fact, Plato was the first to deal widely with enthusiasm, and distinguished 4 types. Here, I would like to mention to remind to Teresa's speech. The enthusiasm caused by Apollo would lead to prophetic delirium. That of Dionysus would be the cause of mystical delirium. The muses would cause poetic delirium, and Eros, amorous delirium. In particular, in this sense, Plato affirmed that the enthusiasm, which is reached through a suspension of intellect, is necessary to grasp the artistic experience, which is impossible to achieve with a technical skill alone. Nevertheless, according to Harry Moore, the suspension of the intellect does not mean the denial of rational knowledge, but rather the awareness that man's rational knowledge is always perspective, only partially capable of understanding the causes of natural world. Indeed, the truly inspired philosopher always pursues rational knowledge and does not allow himself to be deceived by the risks of deviated imagination. However, he knows that his rational research is limited and can lead in 2 directions. Either reason stops and negative enthusiasm prevails, with the consequence that the philosopher reaches wrong doctrines, or reason makes a logical leap and reaches true knowledge, which is inspired from above, or better, intellect does this, which in the Neoplatonic tradition is the human faculty able to suspend logical categories. This knowledge is itself rational because it derives from the ratio universalis and is ordered according to the law of the all. But human reason understands it only partly, and only a few enlightened minds have the privilege of accessing it. These minds are, for example, that of Plato, that of Plotinus, and of course, that of Harry Moore. In conclusion, I think that Harry Moore's Enthusiasmus Triumphatus leaves many rooms of interest open, and many social implications are to be considered. In particular, I would like to mention 2 aspects of Harry Moore's analysis on enthusiasm, which are original in the English debate of the 17th century. Firstly, he suggests a synthesis between rational religion and true enthusiasm. In some ways, these 2 approaches, so theological and metaphysical knowledge, seem incompatible one to the other, because enthusiasm is properly caused by irrational imagination, which in turn is away from true knowledge or rational knowledge. Nevertheless, he identifies a remarkable kind of enthusiasm caused not by melancholy and so irrationality, but by the true divine presence of God in the soul of good Christians. Therefore, Moore highlights the possibility to link together rational religion and enthusiasm. Secondly, the pivotal theme of Harry Moore's research on the topic is to recognize the same link between enthusiasm and philosophy, which is traditionally understood as the rational tool to investigate sensible and metaphysical worlds. In fact, the author considers philosophy to be the main way to grasp true knowledge, and it is at the same time rational and mystical. As a matter of fact, only few philosophers were and are truly inspired in their research. Lastly, as I have already mentioned, he finds this same dialectic in the field of politics, often identifying the philosopher affected by positive enthusiasm with the rightly inspired politician. Thus, Harry Moore puts together the theoretical aspect of the investigation on enthusiasm with the social one, which was in the England of his time, the 17th century. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Valentina. This was wonderful. And we have some time for questions. We have 10 minutes.
Matthew.
Thank you, Valentina. I really enjoyed that. I guess I have a question I wonder what Henry Moore would think about how I'm supposed to tell the difference between the positive kind of enthusiasm and the negative kind of enthusiasm. So if I suddenly think that I have new metaphysical insights that are driving me to construct a new metaphysical system, or if I think I have a kind of moral insight into practices around me, how am I supposed to know whether this is merely the result of melancholy acting on my imagination, or whether I'm like Plato and Plotinus?
Matthew, what can I say? I have an example. No, Harry Moore has an example for you and for me. For Harry Moore, the greatest example of the false philosopher, or enthusiastic philosopher, or melancholic philosopher was Paracelsus. I was surprised about this because according to the Neoplatonic tradition, I think that Paracelsus was an important storm. According to Harry Moore, Paracelsus incited enthusiastic people to think of themselves as wise men, and this is the error. This was the mistake. In fact, imagination and the success that his ideas enjoyed amongst credulous people would have increased absurd and insane philosophical theories, both from a physical and from a metaphysical point of view. I think that your remark is also very connected with Robert Barton's work, The Anatomy of Melancholy, 1620-21, so a little bit later. Barton affirms that there are two kinds of aspects also in this problem, and there are two kinds of perspectives in order to be absorbed by the problem. In other words, Barton affirms that he writes about melancholy in order to be absorbed by a demanding activity, hoping in this way to avoid being a victim of this disease, as had already happened to Barton. And so I think that melancholy was the pivotal, the crucial point to enter into Harry Moore's problems of negative enthusiasm.
Thanks.
Thank you.
We have some more time. Teresa.
Oh, thank you, Valentina. I really enjoyed your talk, and I have a very general question, and I would like to ask you if Ficino has some influence on Moore in this topic, especially melancholy?
Teresa, I was wondering the same when you were talking about Ficino at the beginning of our session. Honestly, I don't know. I don't know because I do not have studied enough to reconstruct more sources in so special way. But I'm sure that the most important source in this frame for Harry Moore was Plotinus. And in the Theologia Platonica, there is a very important passage, but you know, where Plotinus it identifies Aristotle as a melancholic, and the tradition derived from Aristotle as melancholic. What does it mean? That melancholic is the origin of a very important philosophical problem. I think that this aspect is very connected between Plotinus and Ficino, is evident. So I guess that Harry Moore, that Ficino was an important, I don't know if direct or indirect source of Harry Moore, but he was, I think.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Teresa.
Well, if we have one more question. I would like to ask you, Valentina, about the relationship with the artistical dimension of this enthusiasm. What is the useful of this artistical development that you mentioned in your presentation?
Yes, Harry Moore doesn't refer to the artistic dimension. I mentioned it because of Plato and the Platonic tradition, but Harry Moore talks about artistic artists in general only in a cursory way. But Damaris Marshall was very involved in this artistic dimension, and so she tried to talk about this with Locke, of course, and we can say also with Harry Moore. But in the Enthusiasmus Triumphatus, we cannot find particular points in order to study the artistic dimension with regard to the enthusiasm.
Thank you, Ale.
Thank you, Nati.
Well, maybe we can move to the next presentation.
Yes, next presentation.